Chapter 1. The Mistake That Changed Everything. The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. Alara pressed her shoulder against the stone archway, watching the downpour turn the cobblestones into rivers of black glass. The market square had emptied hours ago, leaving her alone with the smell of wet wool and her own shivering breath. She pulled the threadbare shawl tighter, though it did nothing against the cold that had settled into her bones weeks ago. The kind of cold that came from sleeping in doorways and skipping meals. She'd been in the city for 23 days. 23 days since she'd fled her village with nothing but the clothes on her back, and the burn of betrayal still fresh in her chest. Her sister's wedding, her sister's husband, the man Alara had loved in secret for 2 years, watching from the edges of drawing rooms as he courted someone else, convincing herself it was proper. It was right. It was what family demanded. Then the night before the wedding, he'd found her in the garden. "You're the one I want," he'd whispered against her hair. "Run away with me." She'd almost said yes, almost believed him. Until she saw her sister watching from the window, tears streaming down her face, and realized the whole thing had been a test. A cruel game to prove Alara's loyalty. When she'd refused him, pushed him away, her sister had screamed that she was a liar, a seductress, a viper in their home. Her parents had believed it. The whole village had believed it. So she'd run. And now she was here, in a city where no one knew her name, and no one cared if she lived or died. She'd sold her mother's ring for bread that lasted 4 days. Sold her good boots for 3 more. Now she had nothing left to sell but her pride, and she was running out of that too. The church bell struck midnight. Alara pushed away from the archway, ignoring the protest of her empty stomach. She needed to find shelter before the night watch came through. They'd chase her off again, maybe worse. Last week they'd taken a girl to the stocks for sleeping in the merchant quarter. Alara couldn't risk it. She hurried down the narrow street, keeping to the shadows. The rain masked the sound of her footsteps, but it also masked everything else. The creak of shutters, the whisper of movement in the dark. She was so focused on the ground ahead that she didn't see the figures until she'd nearly walked into them. 3 men. No, not men. Something in her hindbrain screamed a warning. They stood too still, too perfect, their faces pale as death in the rain. One of them turned his head with an unnatural fluidity, and his eyes caught the lamplight like a cat's. "Well?" he said, and his voice was silk over steel. "What do we have here?" Alara stumbled backward, her heart hammering. She'd heard the stories, whispers in taverns, warnings from old women. Things that walked at night, things that fed. Vampires. "Please," she whispered, though she knew begging was useless. "I'm nobody. I have nothing." "Oh, we know," the vampire said, taking a step closer. His companions flanked him, moving with the synchronized grace of predators. "That's what makes you perfect. No one will miss you. No one will ask questions." Terror flooded her veins, sharp and electric. She turned to run, but her legs were weak from hunger and cold, and she made it barely 3 steps before her foot caught on the uneven stones. She fell hard, pain exploding through her palms as they scraped against the cobblestones. The vampires laughed, soft, terrible sounds that didn't belong to anything human. Then a new voice cut through the rain, cold and absolute. "Enough." The laughter died instantly. Alara looked up, blinking water from her eyes. A 4th figure stood at the end of the street, tall and still as a monument. The rain seemed to part around him, as if even the weather knew better than to touch him without permission. He wore black, a long coat that moved like shadow, and his face was sharp enough to cut glass. But it was his eyes that froze her in place, dark, ancient, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Lord Valerius," one of the vampires breathed, and the fear in his voice was palpable. The man, Valerius, moved forward, and it was like watching death itself take form. He didn't walk so much as materialize, each step covering impossible distance. The 3 vampires backed away, their predatory confidence evaporating. "She's under my protection," Valerius said quietly. "Leave. We didn't know. Leave. Now." They vanished into the shadows so quickly Alara wondered if they'd been real at all. She was alone with the stranger, kneeling in the rain, her hands bleeding and her whole body shaking. She should run. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. Valerius looked down at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he extended his hand, pale, elegant, terrifying in its perfection. "Get up," he said. Alara stared at his hand. At the creature who had just saved her life, at the monster who was probably going to kill her himself. She was so tired, so cold, so completely, devastatingly alone. Later, she would tell herself it was delirium, hypothermia, the kind of madness that comes from too many nights without food or shelter. But in that moment, as she took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, something broke open in her chest, some desperate, wounded part of her that had been holding itself together through sheer force of will. And before she could think, before she could stop herself, she stumbled forward into his arms and pressed her face against his chest. She felt him go absolutely rigid, every muscle locking in what might have been shock or fury. His coat was cold beneath her cheek, but solid, real, the first steady thing she'd touched in weeks. She knew she should pull away, knew this was insane, suicidal, the worst mistake she'd ever made, but she couldn't let go. "I'm sorry," she whispered into the dark fabric, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, I can't anymore. I can't." For 3 heartbeats, Valerius didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't push her away or tear her throat out, or do any of the things a vampire should do when a human dared to touch them without permission. Then, slowly, so slowly she barely noticed, his hands came up to rest against her back, and the king of vampires held her in the rain while she fell apart. Chapter 2. The sanctuary of shadows Alara woke to candlelight and the smell of old wood. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The ceiling above her was vaulted stone, crossed with dark beams that disappeared into shadow. Tapestries hung on the walls, faded reds and golds depicting scenes she couldn't quite make out in the flickering light. The bed beneath her was impossibly soft, piled with quilts that smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something ancient and indefinable. Then memory crashed back. The rain, the vampires, the stranger in black. The way she'd collapsed against him like a fool, like a child, like someone who'd forgotten that monsters didn't offer comfort. She sat up too quickly, her head spinning. Her clothes were gone, replaced by a white nightgown that was too fine, too clean, too much like something from a life she'd lost. Her hands were bandaged, the cuts from her fall wrapped in soft linen. Someone had tended to her. Someone had undressed her. Panic clawed at her throat. "You're awake!" Alara's gaze snapped to the corner of the room. Valerius stood in the shadows, so still she'd mistaken him for part of the darkness. He was exactly as she remembered, tall, angular, terrifying in his perfect composure. In the candlelight, she could see him more clearly. Black hair that fell just past his collar, skin like marble, features that would have been beautiful if they weren't so cold. "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse, weak. She hated the sound of it. "My home." He moved forward, each step measured and deliberate. "You collapsed. I brought you here. Why? Because you would have died in that street." He said it without inflection, as if stating an obvious fact. "And because those vampires were from House Corvain. If they'd killed you, it would have been seen as a declaration of intent." Alara pulled the quilts higher, though they offered no real protection. "I don't understand." "You don't need to." Valerius stopped at the foot of the bed, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're safe here. For now, she repeated, tasting the words. "And after? After you leave. Return to wherever you came from. Forget this happened." He turned away, moving toward a table laden with covered dishes. "But first you eat. You're half dead from starvation." He lifted the covers, revealing bread still warm from the oven, cheese, dried fruit, a bowl of soup that steamed in the cool air. Alara's stomach clenched with sudden, vicious hunger. She couldn't remember the last time she'd seen so much food. "I can't pay you," she said quietly. "I'm not asking for payment." "Then what do you want?" Valerius looked back at her, and for a moment, something flickered in his expression. Too quick to name, too complex to understand. "Nothing," he said finally. "I want nothing from you." It should have been reassuring. Instead, it made her more uneasy. She climbed out of bed slowly, her legs shaking. The stone floor was cold beneath her bare feet, but she forced herself to walk to the table. Valerius moved away immediately, putting distance between them as if her proximity was something dangerous. She wanted to laugh at the absurdity. She was the one who should be afraid. She ate slowly, trying to maintain some dignity even as her body screamed for more. The bread was heaven. The soup was warmth made liquid. She didn't realize she was crying until a tear fell into the bowl. "Why did you help me?" she asked without looking up. Silence stretched between them. When Valerius finally answered, his voice was carefully neutral. "You touched me." Ilara's hand froze halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking, 'No one touches me.'" He said it like a confession or a curse. "No one has touched me in a very long time." She looked at him then, really looked at him. He stood with his back to the wall, arms crossed, every line of his body radiating controlled tension. In the stories, vampires were seducers, monsters who lured humans close with beauty and charm. But there was nothing seductive about Valerius. He held himself like a weapon, like something too dangerous to be approached. "How long?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "I think it does." His jaw tightened. 63 years. The number hung in the air between them, impossible and terrible. Ilara thought of her own loneliness. 3 weeks of isolation that had nearly broken her. She couldn't imagine 63 years. "Is it because of what you are?" she asked carefully. "It's because of who I am." Valerius moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtain. Beyond the glass, the city sprawled in darkness, punctuated by scattered lights. "I am the head of House Nyx, the oldest of the old blood. Other vampires fear me. Humans flee from me. That is the natural order of things. I didn't flee. You were too weak to run." But there was something in his voice now. Not quite amusement, but not quite the cold detachment either. Ilara set down the bowl, her hunger momentarily forgotten. "What happens now? Now you rest. Your body needs time to recover." He let the curtain fall back into place, returning the room to its cocoon of shadow and candlelight. "When you're strong enough, I'll arrange safe passage out of the city. You'll need money, new clothes, papers if you're running from something." "I am," she admitted. "But not from the law." "I didn't ask. Why not?" "Because everyone who ends up on these streets is running from something." Valerius moved toward the door, and she realized with a start that he was leaving. "Get some rest. You'll find everything you need here. Don't leave this room. The house is complicated. Wait." The word escaped before she could stop it. He paused, his hand on the door. "The vampires who attacked me. You said they were from House Corvain. Will they come back?" "Not here. Not while you're under my protection." His voice was absolute, final. "No one is foolish enough to challenge me in my own territory." "And you? Are you going to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the question that had been lurking in her mind since she'd woken. Valerius turned to face her fully, and in the candlelight his eyes were endless, unreadable. "If I intended to feed on you, you would already be dead. I don't play with my food." Somehow, that was more disturbing than a threat would have been. "Sleep," he said. And this time there was something almost gentle in his tone. "You're safe here." "That's not a lie." Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Ilara stood alone in the beautiful room, surrounded by luxury she didn't deserve, protected by a monster who claimed to want nothing from her. She should be planning her escape, should be looking for windows, weapons, ways out. Instead, she crawled back into the impossibly soft bed, pulled the quilts around her like armor, and for the first time in 23 days, she slept without fear. Chapter 3. The Unraveling. 3 days passed in the sanctuary of Valerius's house, and Ilara began to notice the strangeness. She woke each evening to fresh candles and a meal waiting on the table. Warm bread, roasted vegetables, sometimes meat that fell off the bone at the touch of a fork. The dishes were always covered, as if they'd just been delivered. But she never heard footsteps in the hall. Never heard anyone approach. The food simply appeared while she slept, prepared by invisible hands. She never saw Valerius during the day. The heavy curtains stayed drawn, the house silent as a tomb. But when darkness fell, she would sense his presence. A cold current in the air. The feeling of being watched even when she was alone. Sometimes she would wake in the dead of night to find him standing in the corner of her room, so still he might have been carved from stone. "Can't you sleep?" she'd asked the second time, her heart hammering. "No," he'd replied simply, and left without explanation. On the fourth evening, Alara decided she'd had enough of the beautiful cage. She'd recovered her strength. The cuts on her hands had healed to thin pink lines, and the hollowness in her stomach had been replaced by something more dangerous: curiosity. Valerius had told her not to leave the room, had warned her the house was complicated. But he'd also left her alone for hours at a time, and Alara had never been good at following rules that didn't make sense. She waited until she heard his footsteps retreat down the hall, then slipped out of bed and eased the door open. The corridor beyond was a study in shadow and candlelight. Sconces lined the walls at intervals, their flames barely pushing back the darkness. The floor was polished wood, cold beneath her bare feet, and the air tasted of old stone and secrets. Portraits hung along the walls, men and women in old-fashioned dress, their painted eyes following her as she passed. Alara moved quietly, trailing her fingers along the wall. The house was massive, sprawling, a maze of corridors that branched and twisted. She passed closed doors, a grand staircase that descended into deeper darkness, rooms filled with furniture draped in white cloth like sleeping ghosts. Then she heard voices. She froze, pressing herself against the wall. The voices were coming from behind a partially open door at the end of the hall, two men speaking in low, urgent tones. "The Corvain house is moving," the first voice said. "Not Valerius, someone younger, nervous. They've been gathering their forces. Marcus believes they're preparing for war. Let them prepare." That was Valerius, cold and dismissive. "House Corvain has been spoiling for conflict for decades. If they want to test our strength, they'll find themselves disappointed. It's not just posturing this time, my lord. They've been targeting humans in your territory. 3 dead in the merchant quarter last week. 5 more missing. They're trying to draw you out." A pause. Then Valerius spoke again, and his voice was sharp enough to cut. "They're using humans as bait. Yes, and if you don't respond, you'll look weak. The other houses are watching. The other houses are always watching." Footsteps, pacing. "Double the patrols in the lower city. Any Corvain vampire found in Nyx's territory is to be brought to me directly. Alive, if possible. And the human? The girl?" Alara's breath caught. She leaned closer to the door, straining to hear. "What about her?" Valerius's tone was carefully neutral. "She's been here 4 days. People will notice. They'll ask questions. Some already think she's—" The younger vampire hesitated. "That you've claimed her." "I've done no such thing. I know that. But perception matters. If the other houses believe you've taken a human consort, it changes the balance of power. It makes you seem vulnerable." "I am not vulnerable." The words were ice and iron. "She's a refugee, nothing more. When she's recovered, she leaves. Then perhaps she should leave sooner rather than later, for her own safety." Another pause, longer this time. "Perhaps," Valerius said finally. "I'll speak with her tonight." Alara pulled back from the door, her heart racing. She needed to return to her room before they discovered her eavesdropping. She turned to retrace her steps, and nearly collided with a figure standing directly behind her. She bit back a scream. The vampire was young, or appeared young, perhaps 20, with copper hair and amber eyes that gleamed in the candlelight. He smiled, showing just a hint of fang. "Lost?" he asked pleasantly. "I was just—" Alara's mind raced. "Looking for the washroom. In the restricted wing? How unfortunate." His smile widened. "You must be Lord Valerius's little stray, the one everyone's talking about." "I'm not anyone's anything." "Of course not." He circled her slowly, like a cat examining a mouse. "Tell me, does he feed from you? Is that why you're still here?" "No." The word came out sharp, defensive. "He's never touched me. Never." The vampire tilted his head. "How strange. Valerius is known for his control, but even he must eat. Unless—" His eyes narrowed. "Unless you're not food." "What are you, then?" Before Alara could answer, a hand closed around the young vampire's throat and slammed him against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Valerius materialized between them, his face a mask of cold fury. "Marcus," he said softly, "would you care to explain why you're threatening my guest?" Marcus clawed at Valerius's hand, his feet dangling off the floor. "I wasn't just curious. Curiosity is a luxury you cannot afford." Valerius's grip tightened. "The next time you speak to her, the next time you so much as look at her, I will remove your eyes and feed them to you. Am I understood? Yes, yes, my lord. Valerius released him, and Marcus crumpled to the floor, gasping. He scrambled to his feet and fled down the corridor without looking back. In the sudden silence, Alara became acutely aware that she was alone with Valerius, who was now turning that terrible focus on her. I told you not to leave your room, he said quietly. I know. I told you the house was dangerous. I know. Then why? He stopped, seeming to struggle with something. When he spoke again, his voice was strained. You have no idea what you're walking into. The politics, the rivalries, the things that live in this house. You're human. You're fragile. And right now you're a liability I can't afford. The words stung more than they should have. Then let me go. I can't. He turned away, one hand bracing against the wall. House Corvain is hunting humans in my territory. If I put you back on the streets, you'll be dead within a day. They'll find you just to spite me. Then what am I supposed to do? Stay in that room forever? No. Valerius looked back at her, and there was something raw in his expression, something almost like pain. You're supposed to be safe. That's all I'm trying to give you. Safety. Nothing more. Alara met his gaze, seeing for the first time the weight he carried. Centuries of isolation, of being feared, of holding himself apart from everything warm and living. You saved my life, she said softly, but now I'm a prisoner in a golden cage. Better a prisoner than dead, is it? She took a step closer, watching him tense. You've been alone for 63 years. Is that really living? His jaw tightened. Go back to your room, Alara. Why won't you let anyone close? Because everyone I've let close is dead. The words were ripped from him, raw and terrible. Go, now, before I remember why keeping you here is a mistake. Alara wanted to argue, wanted to push, but something in his voice stopped her. She turned and walked back down the corridor, feeling his eyes on her the entire way. When she reached her room and closed the door, she leaned against it, her heart pounding. She'd glimpsed something beneath his ice. Grief, loneliness, fear. And against all reason, all sense, she wanted to reach for it, wanted to reach for him. Chapter 4. The Threads Between Them. Alara didn't see Valerius for 2 days after their confrontation in the hallway. The meals still appeared. The candles were still lit. But the presence she'd grown accustomed to, that cold current in the air that meant he was near, was absent. The house felt emptier without it, and she hated that she noticed. On the third night, she found a book on her breakfast table. It was old, bound in dark leather with gold lettering on the spine. A history of the night courts. No note, no explanation, just the book sitting beside her bread and tea like an answer to a question she hadn't asked aloud. Alara picked it up carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. She'd asked him why he wouldn't let anyone close. Maybe this was his way of answering, not with words, but with understanding. She spent the evening reading by candlelight, and what she learned made her skin prickle. The vampire houses were ancient, their hierarchies built on blood and power and ruthless political maneuvering. House Nyx was the oldest, its bloodline unbroken for over 2,000 years. Valerius was the last of his line, the sole survivor of a purge that had wiped out his entire family 3 centuries ago. He'd taken control of the house at 18, barely more than a boy, and held it through sheer force of will and calculated brutality. The book described him as the Iron King, feared and respected in equal measure. Other houses tested him constantly, looking for weakness, for any crack in his armor. He'd never taken a consort, never formed alliances through marriage, never shown favor to anyone, vampire or human. He stands alone, the author wrote, because to stand beside him is to become a target. Alara closed the book slowly, her chest tight. Everyone he'd let close was dead. He hadn't been speaking metaphorically. He'd been stating a fact carved into his history with blood and loss. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Come in," she said, expecting one of the silent servants she'd never seen. Valerius entered instead, and she noticed immediately that something was different. He moved more slowly, his usual perfect posture slightly off. There was a tear in his coat, and beneath it, she glimpsed the dark stain of blood. "You're hurt," she said. Standing, it's nothing. But his voice was tight, controlled in a way that suggested pain. Nothing doesn't bleed through your clothes. Ilara moved toward him before thinking better of it. What happened? House Corvain sent assassins. He said it casually, as if discussing the weather. They were poorly trained. It's handled. You're bleeding. I'm healing. Vampire bodies repair themselves given time. He started to turn away, clearly intending to leave. Wait. The word came out sharper than she intended. Just wait, please. He paused, his back to her. Why? Because you gave me food when I was starving. Shelter when I had none. The least I can do is... She gestured helplessly. Let me help, please. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly, he turned back to face her. You don't owe me anything. I know, but I'm offering anyway. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise maybe, or something more dangerous. After another heartbeat of hesitation, he shrugged out of his coat. Beneath it, his white shirt was torn and stained red across his left side. Ilara's breath caught. That's not nothing, Silverblade. Takes longer to heal. He said it matter-of-factly, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the careful way he held himself. It'll be fine by morning. Sit, she ordered, gesturing to the chair by the fireplace. To her surprise, he obeyed. She found water and clean cloth in the washroom, her hands shaking slightly as she returned. This was insane. She was about to tend to a vampire's wounds, a creature who could kill her without effort, who'd lived for centuries, who probably thought her concern was laughable. But when she knelt beside the chair and looked up at him, she didn't see mockery in his expression. She saw something more complicated. Wariness, curiosity, and beneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with his injury. I need to... She gestured to his shirt. Valerius lifted the hem without comment, revealing the wound. It was a deep slash across his ribs, the edges blackened and angry. Silver poisoning, she realized. The book had mentioned it, one of the few things that could truly hurt an immortal. Ilara dampened the cloth and began cleaning the wound as gently as she could. His skin was cold beneath her fingers, smooth and perfect everywhere except where the blade had bitten. She felt him tense at her touch, every muscle going rigid. I'm sorry, she murmured. I'm trying to be careful. It's not the pain. His voice was strange, strained. I told you. No one touches me. She paused, looking up at him. Do you want me to stop? A muscle worked in his jaw. No, he said finally. Don't stop. She continued her work in silence, hyper-aware of every point of contact. Her fingers against his skin. The cool solidity of him. The way he held himself so carefully still as if he might shatter. The wound was already beginning to close, the blackened edges fading to pink. Vampire healing was remarkable. The book, she said quietly, needing to fill the silence. Thank you for that. You wanted to understand. I do. But it makes me sad. Everything you've lost. Everything you've had to give up to survive. Survival isn't about what you want. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice. He watched her hands move over his skin. I learned that lesson early. You were 18 when they killed your family. 17. I was 18 when I killed everyone responsible. No emotion in his voice, just facts. That's what the book doesn't tell you. How many people I've destroyed to keep this house standing. How many threats I've eliminated. How many times I've proven I'm not someone to be trifled with. Is that why you saved me? To prove something? No. The word was immediate, certain. I saved you because those vampires were breaking the oldest law we have. Humans are not to be hunted for sport. They broke it in my territory, where I am responsible for keeping the peace. And because, he stopped, jaw tightening. Because, she prompted softly. Because you looked at me like I was a person. Not a monster, not a king, just a person. His eyes met hers, and the vulnerability in them was staggering. And then you touched me like I wasn't something to be afraid of. Ilara's breath caught. The wound was clean now, the cloth stained red in her hands, but she didn't move away, neither did he. You are something to be afraid of, she said honestly. You're powerful and dangerous and you've killed people, but you're also lonely and grief-stricken and trying so hard to keep everyone at arm's length that you've forgotten what it feels like to just be close to someone. I haven't forgotten. His voice was rough. I remember exactly what it feels like. That's why I don't allow it. Because everyone you love dies. Yes. So you've decided to live forever alone, forever untouched. Forever. She struggled for the word. Frozen. It's safer that way. For who? Them or you? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Valerius stood abruptly, pulling his shirt back down, putting distance between them. But his movements were unsteady, and Alara saw it. The crack in his armor, the moment of weakness he couldn't quite hide. Thank you, he said stiffly, for your help. Valerius, you should sleep. Tomorrow I'll arrange for your departure. You've been here too long already. People are talking, and it's only a matter of time before House Corvain realizes you're here and tries to use you against me. Use me how? His expression was bleak. By making you bleed until I come for you. That's how this works. That's why you have to leave. And if I don't want to? The words escaped before she could stop them. Reckless and true. Valerius stared at her, something raw and desperate flickering across his face before he crushed it down. It doesn't matter what you want, he said quietly. It only matters what keeps you alive. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with blood-stained cloth and the echo of words neither of them had been brave enough to say. Chapter 5. When War Comes Knocking, Alara woke to the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright, her heart already racing. The candles had burned low, casting the room in deep shadow. But through the window she could see orange light flickering. Fire, somewhere close. Shouts echoed through the house, followed by a sound that made her blood run cold, inhuman screaming, high and terrible. The door burst open. Marcus, the copper-haired vampire, stood in the doorway, his eyes wild.
Get up, now! What's happening?
House Corvain. They're attacking. He grabbed her arm, pulling her from the bed. Lord Valerius sent me to get you out. Where is he? Fighting. Now move, unless you want to burn with the rest of us. He dragged her into the corridor, and Alara's breath caught. The house was chaos. Smoke poured through the halls, thick and choking. Vampires ran past them, some carrying weapons, others simply fleeing. Through the windows, she could see figures moving in the courtyard. Too many of them, converging on the house like a dark tide. How many? She gasped, coughing. 30, maybe more. Marcus pulled her down a side corridor, away from the main staircase. They brought fire and silver. They're not here to negotiate. A window exploded inward, showering them with glass. A vampire landed in front of them, pale female, her face twisted with rage. She lunged for Alara, claws extended. Marcus intercepted her, and they collided in a tangle of limbs and fury. Alara stumbled backward, watching in horror as they tore at each other. Blood splattered the walls, black in the dim light. The female vampire's claws raked across Marcus's face, and he screamed. Alara looked around desperately. There, a candelabra on a side table, she grabbed it, the metal heavy in her hands, and without thinking swung it with all her strength at the vampire's head. The impact jarred her arms. The vampire stumbled, giving Marcus the opening he needed. He grabbed her throat and twisted sharply. The sound of breaking bone was sickeningly loud. The vampire crumpled. Marcus turned to Alara, blood streaming down his face, his expression caught between shock and something like respect. We need to move, Alara said, her voice shaking. The candelabra was still in her hands, and she couldn't make herself let go. They ran. The house was a maze of smoke and shadow. Marcus led her through servants' passages, narrow corridors she'd never seen. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew louder, metal on metal, screams, the roar of flames. The heat was building, the smoke getting thicker. The catacombs, Marcus panted. There's a tunnel that leads outside the city walls. If we can reach it... An explosion rocked the house. The floor buckled beneath them, and Alara fell hard, her knees slamming into stone. The candelabra rolled away. Through the smoke, she saw part of the ceiling collapse, blocking the corridor ahead. No, Marcus snarled. No. Is there another way? Not from here. He turned, his amber eyes finding hers. We have to go back. Through the main hall. That's where they are. I know. They had no choice. Marcus led her back through the smoke, moving fast and low. The main hall was carnage. Bodies littered the floor, vampire and human both. The grand staircase was burning, flames licking up the banister. And in the center of it all, Alara saw him. Valerius fought like death incarnate. He moved through his enemies with brutal efficiency, each motion economical and devastating. A blade flashed in his hand, silver, she realized, taken from one of his attackers and turned against them. Blood painted his clothes, his face, but he didn't slow. Didn't hesitate, and he was losing. There were too many. For every vampire he cut down, 2 more pressed forward. They were hurting him, she realized, driving him back toward the flames, boxing him in. "We have to help him," Elara said. Marcus grabbed her arm. "Are you insane? We have to run while they're distracted. He saved me. I won't leave him to die. You're human. What can you possibly—" Elara wrenched free and ran before she could talk herself out of it. The smoke provided cover. She kept low, skirting the edges of the battle, her mind racing. She couldn't fight vampires, that was suicide. But the house was burning. The structure was compromised. And above them the chandelier swayed dangerously, its chain weakened by heat and flames. She saw the mechanism on the wall, a lever that controlled the chain's release. It was used for lowering the chandelier for cleaning. Her father had been a craftsman. She understood how these things worked. Elara sprinted for the lever, her lungs burning. A vampire spotted her and lunged, but Marcus intercepted him, shouting something she couldn't hear over the roar of flames. She reached the lever and looked up. Valerius was directly beneath the chandelier, surrounded by 6 Corvain vampires. They pressed closer, their weapons raised, moving in for the kill. "Valerius," she screamed. "Move!" His head snapped toward her. Their eyes met across the chaos, and she saw his expression shift. Confusion, then understanding, then something that might have been fear. Not for himself. For her. She pulled the lever, the chain released with a metallic shriek. The massive chandelier plummeted, hundreds of pounds of iron and crystal and burning candles. Valerius threw himself backward, inhumanly fast. The Corvain vampires weren't fast enough. The impact was devastating. The chandelier crashed down, crushing 3 vampires instantly. Fire spread from the burning candles, igniting the oil from shattered lamps. The remaining Corvain vampires scattered, their formation broken, their advantage lost. Valerius surged forward, and now it was their turn to fall back. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat, his blade finding throats, hearts, the vulnerable spaces between ribs. Within seconds it was over. The surviving attackers fled, disappearing into the smoke. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of flames. Valerius stood in the center of the destruction, blood-soaked and breathing hard. Then he turned and looked directly at Elara, and the expression on his face was something she couldn't name, fury and wonder and terror all at once. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed her shoulders, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "What were you thinking?" His voice was raw, ragged. "You could have been killed. They would have torn you apart. They were going to kill you." She shot back, her own fear turning to anger. "Was I supposed to just watch?" "Yes, you were supposed to run. You were supposed to save yourself, like everyone else in your life, like everyone who's left you alone." The words came out sharp, cutting. "I'm not leaving you. Not like this." Something broke in his expression. He pulled her against him, one hand fisting in her hair, the other wrapped around her waist so tightly she could barely breathe. He was shaking. This ancient, powerful creature was shaking against her. "You impossible, reckless." He stopped, his face pressed against her hair. "You saved my life. We're even now." A sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. Around them the house burned. Marcus appeared through the smoke with a dozen other vampires, shouting about structural damage, about retreating to the lower levels. But Valerius didn't move, didn't let her go. "My lord," Marcus said urgently, "the house won't hold much longer. We have to evacuate." "Then evacuate." Valerius finally released Elara, but kept one hand wrapped around hers. "Take everyone to the safe house on the eastern border. Send word to our allies. House Corvain has broken the accord. This is war now. And you?" Valerius looked down at Elara, and there was something different in his eyes, something raw and new and terrifying. "I'm taking her somewhere they can't reach. Somewhere safe. Where?" Elara asked. His grip tightened on her hand. "The one place no vampire dares to go uninvited." "Which is?" "Home," he said quietly. "My real home. Where this all began." Chapter 6. The Castle of Ghosts. They rode through the night in a carriage that smelled of old leather and older secrets. Alara sat across from Valerius, watching the dark countryside roll past through the window. He'd given her a coat, heavy wool that swallowed her frame, and though he hadn't changed his blood-stained clothes, he'd wiped most of the gore from his face. In the dim light of the carriage lamp, he looked carved from marble, beautiful and cold and utterly remote, except for his hand, which hadn't released hers since they'd left the burning house. "Where are we going?" she asked for the third time. "I told you. Home." "That's not an answer." His jaw tightened. "The ancestral seat of House Nix. The castle where I was born. Where my family died." He finally looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "It's been empty for 300 years. No one goes there. Not even other vampires. Why not?" "Because it's haunted." He said it without irony, without humor. By memories, if nothing else. The carriage jolted over rough terrain, leaving the main road behind. Trees pressed close on either side, their branches scraping against the windows like grasping fingers. Alara shivered despite the coat's warmth. "The attack," she said quietly. "They were trying to kill you." "Yes, because you're alone. Because you have no allies, no family, no one to avenge you if they succeed." "Yes. And I made it worse. By being there." But she gestured helplessly. "They saw weakness. They saw someone you might care about." Valerius was silent for a long moment. Then, they saw correctly. The admission hung between them, too large and terrifying to examine directly. Alara's breath caught, her heart doing something complicated and painful in her chest. "You can't," she whispered. "You can't care about me. It makes me a target. I know. Then why? Because I'm selfish." His hand tightened on hers. "Because for 63 years I've kept everyone at a distance. Told myself it was for their protection. Convinced myself that isolation was strength. And then you collapsed into my arms in the rain and..." He stopped, something raw flickering across his face, and I remembered what it felt like to be human. To want something beyond survival. "I'm not worth dying for. That's not your decision to make." The carriage lurched to a stop. Outside, Alara could see nothing but darkness and the suggestion of stone. Valerius released her hand. She felt the loss of his touch like a physical thing and opened the carriage. "Door, we're here." Alara stepped down and immediately understood why no one came to this place. The castle rose before them, like a broken tooth against the night sky. Towers crumbled, walls breached by time and weather. Vines covered everything, thick as rope, pulling the ancient stones back toward the earth. Windows gaped like empty eye sockets. The air tasted of decay and old magic. "It's..." She struggled for words. "A ruin," Valerius finished. "Yes, but it still stands. And the wards my ancestors placed on it still hold. No vampire can enter without permission from the bloodline. House Corvain can send an army, and they'll break themselves against those walls before they breach them." He led her through the overgrown courtyard, past a fountain choked with dead leaves, up steps worn smooth by centuries of feet. The main door hung askew on its hinges, and beyond it stretched darkness absolute. Valerius produced a torch from somewhere, struck it alight. Fire bloomed, pushing back the shadows to reveal a grand entrance hall gutted by time. The floor was littered with debris, fallen plaster, broken furniture, the skeletal remains of tapestries. But beneath the decay, Alara could see traces of former glory, carved pillars, a soaring ceiling painted with faded frescoes, the ghost of elegance. "This was yours," she said softly. "Your home. Once." Valerius moved deeper into the hall, his torchlight casting wild shadows. "My father was lord here. My mother was human. Did the book mention that? She was an artist, brought here to paint the ceiling. He fell in love with her work, then with her. The other houses never forgave him for it. A human bride weakened the bloodline, they said. Made us vulnerable. Were they right? My mother gave me 20 years of happiness before she died of fever. My father gave me 8 years of grief before House Corvain killed him in his sleep. My siblings..." His voice cracked just slightly. "They burned them alive in the East Wing. I can still hear them screaming." Alara's chest constricted. "How old were you?" 17. "Old enough to fight. Too young to win." He stopped before a doorway, his hand bracing against the frame. "I survived because I ran. Hid in the catacombs while my family died above me. When I finally emerged 3 days later, the castle was empty. Everyone was dead, and I was alone." She wanted to touch him, to offer comfort, but something in his posture warned her away. This was his grief, ancient and private, and he was only sharing it because the walls had finally crumbled. I rebuilt House Nix from ashes, he continued quietly, hunted down everyone responsible, made myself into something too dangerous to challenge. But I could never come back here, never face what I'd lost. He looked at her, and his eyes were endless with pain. Until now. Why now? Because you're worth protecting, and this is the only place I can keep you safe. He led her through the ruins, up a staircase that groaned under their weight, down a corridor lined with portraits whose faces had been clawed away. Finally, they reached a door that stood intact. Heavy oak, banded with iron. Valerius pushed it open to reveal a room that time had touched more gently. Dust covered everything, but the furniture was whole. A bed with posts carved like trees, a wardrobe, a desk, books still stacked on shelves. A child's room frozen in time. This was mine, he said. Before. Alara walked slowly through the space, seeing traces of the boy he'd been. A wooden sword leaning in the corner, a music box on the dresser. Sketches pinned to the wall, a woman's face, drawn with love and skill. His mother. I haven't been in here since the night they came, Valerius said from the doorway. I couldn't, he stopped, jaw working. But it's safe. The roof is sound, the wards are strongest here. You can sleep without fear. Where will you be? Close, always close. He set the torch in a wall bracket. I'll bring supplies in the morning. Food, water, blankets, whatever you need. Valerius. She turned to face him. Thank you for trusting me with this. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she understood the magnitude of what he'd shared. You saved my life tonight. You could have run, should have run, but you stayed. You fought for me. His voice dropped. No one has fought for me in 300 years. Then they were all fools. He laughed, a real laugh, startled and genuine. Then slowly he crossed the room until he stood before her. Close enough to touch, but not touching. His control was back in place, that careful distance he maintained. But there were cracks in it now, visible fractures. You're dangerous, he said softly. Do you know that? Dangerous to my carefully constructed walls, to everything I've built to keep myself safe. Maybe your walls need to come down. Maybe. But walls exist for a reason. He lifted his hand, hovering near her face, not quite making contact. If I let you in, truly let you in, and House Corvain takes you from me, I will burn the world down to ashes. Do you understand? I will become the monster they all fear, and there will be no mercy, no restraint, no humanity left in me. Alara's breath caught at the intensity in his voice, the terrible truth of it. Then we make sure they don't take me. How? You're human, fragile, mortal. I'm also clever and brave, and I'm not leaving you. She did touch him then, her hand covering his where it hung in the air between them. Not until you tell me to go. Not while you need me. His control shattered. He pulled her against him, his arms crushing her close, his face buried in her hair. He was shaking again, this ancient, powerful creature undone by simple human warmth. Alara wrapped her arms around him and held on, feeling centuries of loneliness pour out of him in waves. I need you, he whispered against her hair. God help me, I need you. And Alara realized with terrifying clarity that she needed him too. Chapter 7. Blood and Revelation Jinning came slowly to the ruined castle, gray light filtering through gaps in the stone. Alara woke wrapped in blankets that smelled of dust and time, her body aching from the previous night's chaos. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then memory flooded back. The attack, the fire, Valerius's confession in the darkness. I need you. She sat up, pushing hair from her face. The room looked different in daylight, less haunted, more melancholy. Someone had been here while she slept. Fresh water sat in a basin on the desk, along with bread, cheese, and a pear so perfect it seemed unreal. A dress had been laid across the chair, deep blue velvet that looked centuries old, but miraculously preserved. Valerius's childhood room. His mother's dress, perhaps. Alara washed quickly, the cold water shocking her fully awake. She pulled on the dress. It fit nearly perfectly, though it hung loose in places where she'd lost weight during her weeks on the street. When she looked at herself in the tarnished mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like someone from another era, someone who belonged in this haunted place. She found Valerius in what had once been the library. Books lined the walls, most ruined by water and time, but some preserved in glass cases. He stood before one of these cases, his hand pressed against the glass, staring at a volume within. He'd changed clothes, black shirt, black trousers, everything about him dark, except for his pale skin and the shadows under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept. "Did you rest?" she asked quietly. He didn't turn. "Vampires don't sleep as humans do. We enter a kind of stasis during daylight hours. But here, in this place," he paused, "the memories are too loud for rest." Alara moved closer, looking at the book he was studying. It was handwritten, the script elegant and fading. "What is it?" "My mother's journal. She wrote every day, documenting her life here, her painting, her love for my father." His voice was carefully controlled. "The last entry was 3 days before she died. She wrote about me. How proud she was. How she hoped I would be happy. Valerius and I wasn't happy. Not after she died. I was angry, bitter. I blamed my father for bringing her here, for making her vulnerable. I told him I wished she'd never come to this place." He finally looked at Alara, and his eyes were raw. "Those were the last words I spoke to him before House Corvain killed him. I wish she'd never come here." Alara's heart clenched. "You were grieving. You were a child. I was old enough to know better, old enough to see the pain in his eyes." He turned away from the case, his jaw tight. "After the massacre, I swore I would never make the same mistake. Never bring someone mortal into this world. Never care enough to become weak. And yet, here I am. Yes, here you are." He moved to the window, looking out over the overgrown gardens. "House Corvain won't stop. Last night was just the beginning. They'll hunt us, find this place eventually, bring siege weapons and fire and everything they need to tear down these walls. How long do we have? Days, maybe a week if we're fortunate." He braced his hands against the window frame. "I've sent word to my allies. Marcus and the others are gathering support, calling in deaths, trying to build a coalition. But the other houses are cautious. They won't risk war with Corvain unless they believe we can win. And can we? Not without leverage." He was quiet for a moment. "There is one thing that might change the balance of power. One secret that could force the other houses to intervene." "What?" Valerius turned back to her, and there was something in his expression that made her nervous. "The accord that governs vampire society has rules about human consorts. If a vampire of royal blood formally claims a human as their bonded partner, that human becomes untouchable. Harming them is considered an act of war against all vampire houses, not just one." Alara's breath caught. "You want to claim me?" "No. Yes. It's complicated." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so human it startled her. "A true blood bond requires mutual consent and the exchange of blood. It creates a permanent link between vampire and human. The human gains extended life, accelerated healing, protection from other vampires. The vampire gains..." He stopped. "Gains what?" "Vulnerability. The bond goes both ways. If the human dies, the vampire experiences their death, feels their pain. Many don't survive it." His voice was tight. "It's the ultimate commitment. The ultimate risk. So if you bonded with me, and House Corvain killed me, it would kill me too. Or drive me mad. Either way, I would be destroyed." He crossed the room until he stood before her. "But while you lived, you would be under the protection of every vampire law we have. Corvain couldn't touch you without declaring war on the entire Night Court." Alara's mind raced. "That's why you brought me here. Not just to hide me, to give yourself time to make this decision. I won't do it without your consent. I won't trap you into immortality, or bind you to a monster just to save my political position." His hands clenched at his sides. "But I need you to understand what's at stake. If we don't do this, House Corvain will keep coming. They'll kill you to hurt me. And then they'll kill me because I'll be too broken to defend myself. And if we do this, if I agree to the bond, then you become mine in the eyes of vampire law. And I become yours, forever, or until one of us dies." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "I would give you immortality if I could, But the bond doesn't work that way. You would live longer, perhaps 200 years instead of 80, but you would still be mortal, still vulnerable, still human, but protected. Yes, protected by laws older than nations. No vampire could harm you without facing the wrath of the entire Night Court. Alara looked into his dark eyes, seeing the fear there, the desperate hope he was trying to hide. What do you want? Not politically, not strategically. What do you want? His thumb brushed her cheek, impossibly gentle. I want you safe. I want you alive. His voice cracked. I want to stop being alone. Then ask me properly. Alara. He said her name like a prayer. Will you bond with me? Will you let me claim you as mine? Protect you with everything I have? Bind my life to yours until death separates us? She should say no. Should run from this haunted castle and this damaged vampire and this impossible situation. Should return to the mortal world where she belonged. But the mortal world had betrayed her. Had cast her out, had left her bleeding in the streets, and Valerius had caught her when she fell. Yes, she whispered. I'll bond with you. Something broke open in his expression, relief and terror, and something that might have been joy. You're certain? Once this is done, it cannot be undone. I'm certain. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. The ritual requires blood. Mine and yours, freely given. It will hurt. The bond will burn through your veins like fire, rewriting parts of your mortal nature. Some humans don't survive it. I trust you. You shouldn't. But his arms tightened around her. We'll do it tonight in the old chapel. The wards there are strongest. And afterward, he pulled back to look at her. Afterward, you'll feel everything I feel. My hunger, my anger, my fear. The bond is intimate in ways I cannot fully explain. You'll know me in ways no one else ever has. Good, Alara said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. I want to know you. All of you. Valerius made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Then he kissed her forehead, chaste and reverent. Tonight then, when the moon rises, I will bind myself to you, and whatever comes after, we face it together. Together. Alara echoed. But even as she said it, a chill ran down her spine. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and in the distance, barely audible, she thought she heard the sound of horses. House Corvain was coming. Chapter 8. The Siege. The horses arrived at dusk, just as Valerius had predicted. Alara watched from the tower window as they emerged from the forest. 30 riders, maybe more, their armor catching the dying light. They moved with military precision, surrounding the castle in a loose perimeter before dismounting. Even from this distance, she could see the silver weapons, the torches, the siege equipment being unloaded from wagons. House Corvain had come prepared for war. They're early, Valerius said behind her. His voice was steady, but she heard the tension beneath it. I'd hoped for more time. How long can the wards hold? Against a direct assault? Days, perhaps. But they'll test for weaknesses, probe the defenses, and they brought a blood mage. He pointed to a figure in crimson robes directing the others. See the one giving orders? He can unravel protective spells if given enough time. Then we do the bonding ritual now, before they breach the walls. No. Valerius turned her away from the window, his hands on her shoulders. The ritual takes hours. It requires perfect concentration. If we're interrupted halfway through, the bond could form incorrectly. It could kill you. And if we wait, they might kill us both. Better that than risk destroying you with a flawed bond. His jaw was set, immovable. We wait until we're certain we won't be disturbed. Marcus is coming with reinforcements. If we can hold until... A bell rang out below. Deep, resonant, impossibly loud. The sound vibrated through the castle stones, through Alara's bones. She saw Valerius go pale. What is that? The challenge bell. House Corvain is formally declaring their intent. He was already moving, pulling her toward the stairs. They're invoking the old law, trial by combat. What does that mean? It means their leader wants to face me in single combat. If I win, they withdraw. If I lose... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They descended into the great hall, their footsteps echoing. The front doors stood open, and beyond them Alara could see the Corvain forces arrayed in the courtyard. At their head stood a vampire she recognized from the attack, tall, silver-haired, with eyes like chips of ice. "Lord Valerius," the vampire called out. His voice carried easily across the distance. "I am Lord Cassius of House Corvain. I claim right of challenge under the old law. Face me in honorable combat, or be named coward before all the houses." Valerius stepped into the doorway, and Alara saw every vampire in the courtyard tense. His presence was a physical thing, power and authority radiating from him like heat. "The old law also states that challenges must be issued for just cause," Valerius said coldly. "What crime do you accuse me of, Cassius?" "Weakness, corruption. You harbor a human in direct violation of your own edicts against attachment. You endanger our kind by showing mercy where none should exist." Cassius smiled, showing fangs. "You have become soft, old friend. The Iron King has rusted. I am soft enough to allow you to leave with your life. That is the only mercy I offer." "Then you refuse the challenge?" "I accept." Valerius's voice was flat, final. "Name your terms." "Single combat. No weapons but what we carry. No interference from either side. First to yield or die loses." Cassius drew a blade, silver, wickedly sharp. "I will even allow you time to arm yourself. I need no weapons to kill you." The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. Alara grabbed Valerius's arm, pulling him back into the shadows of the doorway. "Don't do this," she whispered urgently. "It's a trap. They brought 30 vampires. Even if you win, they'll attack. Anyway, if I refuse, I lose the moral authority to lead House Nyx. The other houses will see me as weak. Corvain will have won without striking a blow." His hand covered hers. "I have to fight." "Then let me help." "No. You stay here, behind the wards. No matter what happens. I'm not watching you die. And I'm not risking you." He cupped her face, his eyes fierce. "Promise me. Promise you'll stay inside where it's safe." Before she could answer, Marcus appeared from the corridor, breathing hard. "My lord, our scouts report more Corvain forces approaching from the east. This isn't just a challenge. It's the opening move of a full assault." Valerius's expression went cold. "How many?" 50, maybe 60. "They'll be here within the hour." "Then Cassius is stalling, keeping me occupied while his reinforcements arrive." Valerius looked back at the courtyard, his jaw tight. "If I don't fight, they'll breach the wards through sheer numbers. If I do fight, it's a distraction." "There's a third option," Alara said quietly. Both vampires turned to look at her. "I go out there. I offer myself in exchange for your safety." She held up a hand as Valerius started to protest. "Let me finish. I walk out, they take me hostage. You have time to prepare proper defenses or evacuate." "Absolutely not. They want leverage against you. I'm that leverage. At least this way." "No." The word was absolute, final. "I would rather burn this castle to the ground with me inside it than hand you over to them. Even if it costs you everything? Especially then." He pulled her close, his voice dropping. "You don't understand what they would do to you. The things Cassius enjoys. I've seen his handiwork. The humans He stopped, jaw working. "I won't let that happen to you." Marcus cleared his throat. "My lord, we're out of time. You need to make a decision." Alara's mind raced, weighing impossible options. Then an idea struck. Reckless, dangerous, but possibly their only chance. "The bonding ritual," she said suddenly. "How much of it can we complete quickly? Enough to invoke the protection laws?" Valerius stared at her. "The first stage, the blood exchange, would establish a preliminary bond. Not complete, but enough to make you legally untouchable under the accord. But it's dangerous without the full ritual. The bond could destabilize, cause pain. Do it. Now. Before you go out there." She grabbed his hands. "If I'm bonded to you, even partially, they can't touch me without violating the old laws. It removes me as a target. It also makes you a liability. If they kill me, the incomplete bond could tear you apart from the inside. Then don't die." Something flashed in his eyes. Surprise, admiration, fear. "You're serious." "Completely." "We do the first stage now. You fight Cassius, and while they're distracted, we complete the ritual properly. It's risky, but it's better than waiting for them to overwhelm us." Marcus was nodding slowly. It could work. An incomplete bond would still carry legal weight. And if Lord Valerius falls in honorable combat, the girl would be protected by mourning laws. Corvain couldn't harm her without dishonoring themselves. "Unless they kill her anyway and claim ignorance," Valerius said darkly. But Alara could see him considering it, weighing the terrible math of survival. "Please," she whispered. "Let me do this. Let me protect you the way you've protected me." For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, "If we do this, if I bind you to me even partially, you need to understand what you're accepting. The bond will hurt. You'll feel my pain when I fight. If I'm injured, you'll suffer. If I die, I know the risks. I'm choosing them anyway." Valerius pulled a knife from his belt. Silver, the same one he'd taken from the attack. He drew it across his palm without hesitation, dark blood welling up. Then he offered the blade to her. "Your blood mixed with mine. Freely given, freely taken. That's all we need for the first stage." His voice was rough. "Say the words with me. I bind myself to you, in blood and trust, until death separates us." Alara took the blade. Her hand shook only slightly as she cut her palm, gasping at the sharp pain. Blood dripped onto the stone floor, mixing with his. When she looked up, Valerius's eyes had gone black, completely inhuman. "I bind myself to you," she said steadily, "in blood and trust, until death separates us." He pressed his bleeding palm to hers. The world exploded into fire. Chapter 9. Fire and Bond Pain. Like lightning tore through Alara's veins. She would have screamed, but Valerius's hand covered her mouth, muffling the sound. His other hand pressed hard against hers, keeping their blood mingled as the bond burned itself into existence. Through the agony, she felt something else. A presence that wasn't her own, cold and vast and ancient, flooding into her consciousness like water through a broken dam. Valerius. She was feeling him. His power, his hunger, his 300 years of loneliness condensed into a single overwhelming sensation. It was too much, too intense, and she was drowning in it. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pain receded to a dull throb. Valerius pulled his hand away from her mouth, his eyes wide with concern. "Breathe. Focus on breathing," Alara gasped, her whole body shaking. The world looked different, sharper somehow, colors more vivid, sounds more distinct. She could hear the Corvain vampires in the courtyard, hear their heartbeats, smell the silver of their weapons. And beneath it all, she felt Valerius like a second pulse in her chest, steady and strong and undeniably present. "It worked," she whispered. "The first stage, yes." He examined their joined hands. The wounds were already healing, faster than they should. "You're bonded to me now. Not completely, but enough. They'll smell it on you. My blood in your veins. Legally, you're under my protection. I feel you. Inside my head. And I feel you." His voice was strained. "Your fear. Your determination. He stopped, something flickering across his face. "We don't have time to adjust. I need to fight now, before the reinforcements arrive." Marcus stepped forward, offering Valerius a coat. "The bond will make the fight harder. You'll feel her reactions to your pain. It could distract you." "I know." Valerius shrugged into the coat, his movements sharp with tension. "Keep her safe. No matter what happens out there, you keep her behind the wards. My lord, that's an order." "Marcus." He turned back to Alara, and there was something raw in his expression, something that looked like goodbye. If I fall, the incomplete bond will cause you pain, but it shouldn't kill you. The full ritual would have tied our lives together permanently. This way, you'll survive. Don't talk like you're going to lose. I'm being practical." He reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was achingly tender. Cassius is 300 years old, well-trained, and he's been preparing for this fight. "I'm strong, but I'm not invincible." Alara grabbed his hand, holding it against her cheek. "You're the Iron King. You've survived 3 centuries of enemies trying to kill you. One more isn't going to be the one that succeeds. Your faith in me is—" He stopped, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. Terrifying and precious. Then he pulled away and walked out into the courtyard. Alara tried to follow, but Marcus's hand on her arm stopped her. "You promised to stay behind the wards." "I promised nothing." But she didn't fight him, just pressed herself against the doorframe, watching. The Corvain vampires had formed a circle in the courtyard, creating an arena. Cassius stood at its center, his silver blade catching the torchlight. He smiled as Valerius approached. Cold, predatory, confident. "No weapon, Valerius? How very like you to rely on arrogance instead of steel." "I don't need steel to end you." They circled each other, and even from the doorway, Alara could feel the tension, the violence coiled and ready to spring. Then Cassius moved, impossibly fast, his blade a silver arc aimed at Valerius's throat. Valerius dodged, but not quickly enough. The blade scored across his shoulder, and Alara gasped as pain exploded through the bond. It wasn't her pain. It was his, filtered through their connection, dulled but still vicious. She tasted blood, felt the burn of silver poisoning. "Focus," she thought desperately. "Don't let him distract you." In the courtyard, Valerius had recovered, moving in close before Cassius could strike again. His hand closed around the other vampire's wrist, and there was a sickening crack. Cassius screamed, dropping the blade, but he wasn't done. His other hand came up, claws extended, and raked across Valerius's chest. More pain flooded the bond, sharp and immediate. Alara's knees buckled and Marcus caught her. "You need to close your eyes," he said urgently. "Stop watching. It's making it worse." "I can't." She forced herself upright. "He needs to know I'm here, that I'm not leaving." The fight devolved into brutal close combat. They moved faster than human eyes could follow, a blur of violence and grace. Blood spattered the stones, black in the torchlight, too dark to be human. Valerius fought with cold efficiency, each strike calculated to maim or kill, but Cassius fought with desperation, with the fury of someone who knew this was his last chance. A blade appeared in Cassius's good hand, a backup weapon, pulled from his boot. He drove it toward Valerius's heart. Valerius twisted, taking the blow in his side instead. The blade sank deep and Alara screamed. The pain was unbearable. She felt the silver burning through Valerius's flesh, felt his strength faltering, felt the cold terror that he might actually die. Through the bond, she pushed everything she had toward him, her determination, her faith, her desperate need for him to survive. "Get up. Please get up." And somehow, impossibly, he did. Valerius grabbed Cassius's head with both hands and twisted. The sound of breaking bone echoed across the courtyard. Cassius's body went limp, and Valerius let it fall. Silence descended, broken only by Valerius's ragged breathing. He turned slowly, his eyes finding Alara across the distance. Blood soaked his clothes, and the blade was still embedded in his side, but he was standing. He was alive. "I yield," one of the Corvain vampires called out. Then another. Then more, until the entire force was kneeling in the courtyard, acknowledging defeat. The old law had been satisfied. Valerius took one step toward the castle, then another. His legs gave out on the third step and he collapsed. Alara broke free of Marcus's grip and ran. The wards parted for her. She was bonded now, recognized as part of House Nyx. She reached Valerius and fell to her knees beside him, her hands hovering over his wounds. "Don't die," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare die now." His eyes found hers, and even through the pain she felt his emotions through the bond, relief, wonder, love. "I won," he breathed. "You did. You won." Tears streamed down her face. "Now stay alive so I can yell at you for scaring me." Marcus was suddenly there with other vampires, lifting Valerius carefully. We need to get him inside. The silver needs to be removed before it spreads. They carried him into the great hall, laying him on a makeshift table. Marcus began working on the wound, pulling the blade free with steady hands. Each movement sent agony through the bond, and Alara gripped Valerius's hand, letting him know she was there. The reinforcements, Valerius managed. Cassius said, "They're retreating," Marcus reported. Without their leader, they have no claim to continue the assault. House Corvain has lost. For now. Valerius's grip tightened on Alara's hand. They'll come back. This isn't over. Then we'll be ready. She leaned close, her forehead against his. But right now you need to heal. Can you do that? With you here? Yes. His eyes drifted closed. The bond, it's helping. Your life force, feeding into mine. That's why incomplete bonds are dangerous. I'm literally drawing strength from you. Take what you need. She meant it. Every word. His eyes opened again, dark and infinite. Finish it. The ritual. Tonight, while I heal, make the bond permanent. You're in no condition. I'm strong enough for this, and we can't risk waiting. If Corvain returns before the bond is complete... He pulled her closer. I need you bound to me, truly, completely, irrevocably. I need to know that if I fall, the bond will protect you. That even in death, I'll have given you something that keeps you safe. Alara looked at Marcus, who nodded slowly. It's possible. Difficult, but possible. The blood has already been exchanged. All that remains is the vow and the sealing. Then we do it, Alara said. Now, before anything else goes wrong, Valerius smiled. Tired, pained, but genuine. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. Then help me up. We finish this in the chapel, where my parents were bonded, where this all began. Chapter 10. Until death and beyond. The chapel stood at the heart of the castle, untouched by time's decay. Candles blazed on every surface, hundreds of them, their light pushing back 3 centuries of darkness. The ceiling soared overhead, painted with stars that still gleamed gold against deep blue. An altar stood at the far end, carved from white marble and draped with cloth that might have been crimson once, but had faded to rust. Marcus and 2 other vampires had carried Valerius here, settling him carefully on the steps before the altar. His wounds were bandaged, the silver extracted, but he was still pale, still weak. The fight had cost him more than he'd admitted. But his eyes were clear when he looked at Alara. This is where they stood, he said quietly. My mother and father. She wore white, he wore black. The entire court attended, and half of them whispered that it was madness, that a vampire lord had no business binding himself to a human artist who would die in a handful of decades. Were they right? Alara knelt beside him on the steps. My father had 57 years with her before she died. 57 years of happiness in a life that spanned millennia. Was it worth the grief that followed? He reached for her hand. He told me once near the end that he would do it all again. Every moment of joy, every second of loss, because loving her had made him more than he was, had made him human again, in all the ways that mattered. And then House Corvain killed him? Yes, because grief had made him vulnerable, because love had given his enemies a target. Valerius's grip tightened. That's the price of this bond, Alara. Not just extended life or protection under our laws. The price is vulnerability, the knowledge that I am giving you the power to destroy me completely. I would never, not intentionally, but if they kill you, I won't survive it. The bond will tear me apart, and even if you die naturally, centuries from now, I will feel every moment of your passing. Will carry that grief for whatever eternity remains to me. His voice was raw. That's what you need to understand before we finish this. You're not just accepting my protection. You're accepting responsibility for my existence. Alara looked at him. This ancient, powerful creature who'd built walls so high nothing could touch him. Who'd survive 300 years alone rather than risk this exact moment. And she realized that he was more terrified than she was. I understand, she said softly. And I'm still choosing this. Choosing you. Relief flooded his expression, so intense it was almost pain. Then we begin. Marcus stepped forward, carrying a leather-bound book. The rite of eternal binding. It hasn't been performed in over a century, but the words remain. He opened the book, his amber eyes scanning the page. You'll need to speak the vows simultaneously, maintaining physical contact throughout. The bond will complete itself as you speak, burning away the preliminary connection and replacing it with something permanent. Will it hurt? Alara asked. Yes, Valerius said simply, but not like before. This pain is different, transformative rather than destructive. He stood carefully, wincing as his wounds protested. Alara rose with him, and they faced each other before the altar where his parents had stood centuries ago. His hands found hers, cold and steady. Marcus began to read. The bond of blood requires truth. Do you, Valerius of House Nyx, offer this bond freely, without coercion or deceit? I do. Do you, Alara, accept this bond freely, understanding its permanence and its price? I do. Then speak the words of binding. Let your voices become one. Valerius's eyes locked with hers, and through the incomplete bond she felt everything he was feeling, love and terror and desperate hope all tangled together. They spoke in unison, their voices weaving together in the candlelit chapel. I bind my life to yours, my breath to yours, my death to yours. Where you go, I follow. Where you fall, I catch you. Where you love, I dwell. From this moment until the last star dies, you are mine, and I am yours. No power in heaven or earth can break what we forge here. I swear it in blood. I swear it in trust. I swear it in love that transcends mortality. The bond ignited. This time the pain was pure fire, white-hot and all-consuming. Alara gasped, her knees buckling, but Valerius held her upright. She felt the incomplete bond dissolving, felt something deeper taking its place. His consciousness flooded into hers. No longer a foreign presence, but a part of her. She felt his memories. Flashes of a childhood in this castle. His mother's smile. The night of fire and blood when everything ended. She felt his loneliness, centuries of it, a weight so crushing she couldn't understand how he'd survived it. And beneath it all, she felt his love for her, fierce and protective and absolutely certain. Then her own memories flowed back through the bond. Her sister's betrayal, the cold streets, the rain the night he'd found her, the moment she'd looked at him and seen not a monster but someone who understood what it meant to be alone. The fire reached its peak, and for one impossible moment they were one person. One mind, one heart, one soul split between two bodies. She didn't know where she ended and he began. Didn't want to know, then gradually they separated. Two distinct beings again, but connected by threads of light and power that would never break. Alara opened her eyes. The world looked different, sharper, brighter, more alive. She could feel Valerius's heartbeat alongside her own, could sense his emotions like colors at the edge of her vision. And when she looked at him, really looked at him, she saw past the cold exterior to the man beneath, wounded, lonely, desperately in love with her. It's done, Marcus said quietly. The bond is complete. Valerius pulled Alara against him, his arms wrapping around her as if he'd never let go. You're mine now, in every way that matters, and I am yours. Forever, she whispered against his chest, or until death separates us. Even then. She pulled back to look at him. The bond survives death, doesn't it? You'll carry me with you, even after I'm gone. Yes. The admission was painful. For whatever centuries remain, you'll be with me. A ghost in my heart. Good. She smiled through tears. Then I'll never really leave you. And you'll never be alone again. Something broke in his expression. 300 years of control finally shattering. He kissed her then, desperate and tender and full of everything he couldn't say. She kissed him back, tasting salt and copper and eternity. When they finally broke apart, breathing hard, Marcus cleared his throat. My lord, the bond is registered now. Every vampire in the Night Court will feel it. House Corvain will know they can no longer touch her. Let them know, Valerius said, not taking his eyes off Alara. Let every house know that I've found something worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth dying for, and worth living for, Alara added firmly. No more death wishes. No more accepting that you'll fall protecting me. We fight together now. We survive together. Together, he agreed. Then he looked past her to Marcus. Send word to the other houses. Tell them the Iron King has taken a consort. Tell them House Nyx is no longer standing alone. And tell them, his voice hardened. Tell them that any who threaten what is mine will face consequences that make the last 3 centuries look merciful. Marcus bowed. It will be done. As he left, Alara felt a tremor through the bond, exhaustion, pain, the cost of the fight, and the ritual finally catching up. Valeria swayed and she caught him. You need to rest. To heal properly, I need you, he corrected. Just stay with me, that's all I need. They settled on the chapel steps, Alara supporting his weight, his head against her shoulder. Through the bond, she could feel his body beginning to repair itself, drawing on her life force, using their connection to accelerate the healing. It should have frightened her. This vampire literally feeding on her energy. Instead, it felt right. Natural. Like breathing. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now we prepare. House Corvain won't give up just because we've bonded. They'll look for other ways to hurt us, to break House Nyx. The other houses will test us, see if the bond makes me weaker or stronger. His arm tightened around her waist. But they'll learn what my father learned. Love doesn't make you vulnerable. It makes you dangerous. Because now I have something worth burning the world for. Let's try not to burn the world. No promises. Despite everything, Alara laughed. Then she felt it through the bond. His amusement. His relief. His overwhelming gratitude that she was here. That she'd chosen him. That after 300 years of winter, he'd found spring again. Outside the chapel, dawn was breaking. Light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting them both in colors, red and gold and deepest blue. In that moment, in that ancient place where his parents had made the same choice, Alara understood something fundamental. She wasn't just bonded to a vampire. She was bonded to a man who'd forgotten how to hope. And together, they would remember. Together, they would survive. Together, they would love. And that more than any magic or law or ancient power was what would save them both.